That was a good start. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Cornerstone Showcase, which started with the words you didn't hear, but the words of the summer, which are, oops, I'm on mute. I'm Simon Savage, and over the next hour, we are going to have a delightful, joyous time with lots of wonderful authors talking about some incredible books that are coming up in the beginning of 2021 into the summer. And let's face it, who isn't ready for 2021? I know I am. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, Cornerstone, the delightful hosts of this whole wonderful event, are an imprint of Penguin catering to all types of readers. They have Century, they have Arrow, they have Murky, Hutchinson, Heinemann, and Windmill, which is quite a tongue twister, actually, I won't lie. So tonight we're going to be meeting some of the authors that are producing wonderful books next year, and I genuinely promise you that these are all books that I am desperate to read. And let's be honest, I've got quite enough to be getting on with, but I just cannot wait for these. They're going to be real fiction highlights, and having chatted to some of the authors before, I genuinely can't wait for you to find out more. So these new voices will be exploring poetry, they'll be exploring the natural and the supernatural, but most of all, they'll be talking about, well, most of all, it's a celebration of storytelling and identity and just all the wonderful things that we can do with escaping into fiction. If you would like, and I feel like I don't even need to ask this question, but if you would like physical or digital proofs, then at the in the chat box there will be a request, and that is where you can go there for all of the info on that. But the chat is in general not really being used, so please don't go asking if I'm wearing pajama bottoms or not right now, because I'm afraid I can't answer. I won't be seeing it. The other thing that will also be sent to you after the event is the Cornerstone catalogue, which will feature all of the fiction and the non-fiction between January and June 2021. This event is being recorded and it will be shared again afterwards, so you can relive the absolute delight and possibly any mistakes I do or don't make as we go along. Also, if you'd like to tweet, which we'd really encourage, due to the powers of technology, you can do via hashtag Cornerstones 2021. Imagine that's a beautiful rolling screen, and also at Arrow Publishing. So hopefully you've all got your Zoom boxes of treats in front of you. I'd like to say that I've still got mine. I've not, it's gone. But sit back, relax, and enjoy this hour of fiction fantabulousness. And we're going to start off with the wonderful Hafsa Zayyan, who was the joint inaugural winner of the Murky Books New Writers Prize 2019. Her debut, We Are All Birds of Uganda, is coming out from Mercury. That's not true. It's coming out from Murky Books. Put my teeth back in January 2021. And here she is to introduce her.
Hi, my name's Hafsa Zayyan, and my book is called We Are All Birds of Uganda, and it's being published by Penguin in January 2021. The story is really a story about migration, and in particular a phenomenon called twice migration, where you have Indians migrating once from India to East Africa, and then twice from East Africa to Europe, and in particular in this story, England. Reflecting that twice migration structure, it's a dual narrative, and the historical strand focuses on the South Asian migrant to Uganda, and it charts his story from 1945 kind of onwards. And then there's a modern day strand which focuses on a British-born South Asian Ugandan second generation immigrant, and his story living in modern day Britain. There's several key themes that I could address. There's a theme of identity and belonging. What is the meaning of home? Success. What does it mean to find success? Does success make you happy? And then there's the major issue, probably the biggest theme of race, colorism, tensions between these three different races, the Africans, the South Asians, and then there's obviously the English people as well. The writing style has been described variously as poetic, lyrical, cinematic, and I guess if I had to compare it to other novelists that I admire, or I should say from whose writing styles I've drawn inspiration, I'd probably say Khaled Hosseini. It's a book meant for everyone. It's quite easy to read, but it's packed with a lot of deeper meaning. Every sentence has a wider resonance. So yeah, that's my summary of We Are All Birds of Uganda. I went to the Barbican and saw Stormzy's launch of Rise Up, and I heard all about Murky Books for the first time and started following them on Instagram immediately. And then they launched this new Writers' Prize, and I'd kind of always been really interested in writing and always loved reading, which is, I think they're quite interlinked, the two things. If you love reading, quite often you end up writing a lot when you're a kid and things. But I'd never taken it any further because I just thought, well, what's the point? Like, I'm never going to get published. But this was an amazing kind of little opportunity. And so I just thought, oh, I'll just enter. And because it was only 2,500 words that you had to write to enter the competition, I just wrote 2,500 words. And then I got shortlisted, and that was a real surprise. And it was crazy. We got to meet Stormzy, the shortlisted authors. And then after that, not long after that, they announced the winner, or so to say winners. There were two of us. I think the quality was very, very high. It was hard to choose one. And yeah, I was one of them, and I couldn't believe it. And I got to meet Stormzy again, and I got to meet Mallory Blackman. And there was just a moment I remember when they were presenting the prize, and I was sitting on a stage, and I think I had Mallory Blackman on my left and Stormzy on my right, and I just had to pinch myself because it was so surreal. But yeah, then I wrote the novel, and here we are, nearly more than a year on, and it's going to be published quite soon.
Well, I got the feeling that Hafsa was very, very, very excited about meeting Stormzy, but then who wouldn't be? And I'm just putting that hint out there that if anyone wants me to share any events with him, I'd be more than delighted to. I have to say, I'm also very, very excited because I already have a proof of that book. And like I said, don't forget, if you want to get your mitts on some proofs, then there'll be details about that at the end. I also wanted to just say thanks to all the authors who have pre-recorded videos. It's really hard to talk, one, at a screen for quite a long time, and two, or a camera, and also to kind of sell yourself in that way. But they all do a fantastic job, as you will see. And you will see that from the second of our authors now, who is Karla Neblett, and her debut, King of Rabbits, is coming out from William Heinemann in March 2021. She has an MA in creative writing, but with this particular book, it's actually her experiences that she's had firsthand that are so key to what she has written. She works with younger children who are dealing with learning difficulties or struggling with behaviour, or may have misused drugs or alcohol. And here she is to introduce King of Rabbits and also Karla.
Hi, my name's Karla. My book's called King of Rabbits. It's a story I've been writing for 3 years, and I still can't explain it. I'm going to try. My brother summed it up in one sentence, and he said it's the story of a young boy's struggle through rural poverty. So yes, it's a coming-of-age novel about Kai. The reason I wrote it is because my favourite author, Joyce Carol Oates, says to write about what haunts you. And actually, in fact, for ages I was trying not to write about the things that the book is about. And then what happened was a few years ago, someone that I loved, a teacher of mine, died. And I really thought to myself, I have to be brave because life's too short. And she was a very courageous person. So yeah, it's the story of Kai. He basically lives in a little village in Somerset, and in a council house with his sisters and his parents, and it's quite a chaotic family. And as the story unfolds, things start happening, and he realizes life isn't quite what he thought it was, and he escapes to the woods and has that's kind of his safe space. He builds a den in that. It's a story that's very much about being working class in Britain, about being a young boy that might get labelled a certain way, and that the system kind of just lets go. It's like a lost generation of young lads that now don't know how to talk and process their emotions, and there's less opportunities and all this kind of thing. And I don't know, I could go on for ages. It drives me crazy. But it's very much trying to be, well, I hope what I've done is kind of represented my class of people and been a voice for people who might find it hard to have a voice and especially don't get seen. It's also a book about addiction. It was really important for me to say that, even if parents get labelled a certain way as not loving their child because they have an addiction, it certainly doesn't mean that that's the truth. There can still be a lot of love in families that have those issues. There's also about suicide, teenage pregnancy. There's no spoilers here. It's all pretty much laid out on the first page. I'm not very good at twists and plots and that. Anyway, I wrote it, so I know there's a lot of really heavy stuff in it, and I wanted it to be an easy read. So the way I hope I've achieved that is, one, by writing in really simple language, because I really wanted the type of boy that Kai is to be able to pick it up in real life, and one, find it easy to read, and two, want to carry on reading it because it was entertaining or kind of felt familiar to them, and they, might think, oh, that happened to me, or, oh, I go to a shop like that, or, oh yeah, that's like the football field. So yeah, I just wanted it to feel real to that kind of person, and I felt like it was time that there were books on the shelves in bookshops that reflected a part of society that don't often get that much attention. So I hope I've done that. A little bit about me. I have a degree in psychology that I got in my early 20s. I got a master's degree in creative writing in my early 30s. And from that, I won the Janko and Nesbitt Award, which got me an agent. And then I got my agent got me a book deal with William Heinemann, and here I am talking to you guys, and it's pretty much changed my life. So yeah, I'm absolutely reeling and don't quite know what to do with myself. All I can say is I hope you read the book. I hope you like it. A lot of you may not, because it's very Marmite. But if you don't like it, I hope that you'll respect the minerals of it, and just for a moment give your attention to a boy that deserves to have some attention, to be looked at for once. So yeah, thank you.
I, for one, am a huge fan of Marmite, so I cannot wait to get to that. A huge thank you to Karla for filming that. And I think it's really important at the moment, one, that people do write what haunts you, which I'll be talking about shortly with our next author, but also about the rural working classes. I just think that's a voice that we haven't heard very much from, and we should certainly be hearing more from. There's also been comparisons to Kerry Hudson, who I am a huge fan of. So on to our next author, and I'm delighted that River Solomons has joined me live here right now. It's all very modern, and they're going to be talking about their latest or forthcoming book, Sorrowland. So Rivers, could you introduce Sorrowland to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sorrowland is the story of a very young woman who's recently fled the very sort of strict religious compound where she grew up, and is living with her two children in the woods, sort of outside of society and outside of the place where she grew up, and where, she might expect to find sort of a peaceful escape. Instead, she's plagued by this sudden transformation that her body is undergoing. And as that's happening to her, she has to sort of connect it to her upbringing and the past that she's kind of fled, and, confront that, as well as potentially confront the outside world. So, yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about Byrne? In terms of a character and in terms of the way that you kind of, how did this whole book kind of come to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the sort of thematically, the book is dealing a lot with sort of things that I've worked with before, sort of generational trauma and, you know, sort of racial injustice, things like that. But the thing that actually really, I think, had me land on the book was I was writing a lot about my experiences of parenthood and motherhood. And so much of this book is kind of, what made this book come alive for me was about that relationship with her children and what's it like to sort of be in that space. And parenthood and things like pregnancy also are just so much about transformation. And I think that those themes sort of lent itself to that sort of this idea of metamorphosis and change.
And I know you're really interested in monsters. That's something that comes up. So could you talk about that?
Yeah. The book is really sort of, it's a reclamation of monsters and the monstrous. And I think this story, that the young woman who's the protagonist, her name is Byrne, I think by anyone outside looking in could easily see her and pass her as a monster. But to me, she's, you know, the hero of the story. And I think that in our society, so many people who have been sort of pushed to the margins and pushed outside, in many ways are cast in the role of the monster. And I don't know, to me, it can actually be something liberating to embrace, you know. I think I've used the phrase like kind of creature of the night before. There's something kind of something a bit, you know, mysterious in that as well, isn't there? So but mostly it's also about power and reclaiming power, and sort of making yourself from something that's abject and hated into something that can actually make change and do something that people are going to have to, they can't push you aside anymore.
And at the moment, there's a really interesting, I've noticed that in culture at the moment, there is a thing around kind of finding out more about the monster or more about the villain. Was that also something that you wanted to nod to?
Well, I think like many, I'm intrigued by sort of villains and monsters, and I, as much as any character, you kind of want them to breathe and sort of have an understanding of how they came to be, or how could they exist. So to some extent, yes, but I think, you know, the truth is, while I was writing it, I see kind of, actually what I wanted to do is what I see as a sort of young girl struggling where other people might see a monster. Do you know what I mean? So it was, it's not necessarily about sort of is saying that this is the monster backstory, as much as, you know, what is a monster, and why have you used that label, kind of thing.
One thing that you've said, I saw you quoted as saying, life in the margins is an uncanny existence. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit, and also how that has fed into your writing.
Yeah. From my sort of personal experience, as I think that being outside in any way that is outside the status quo, and that could be, you know, racially or ethnically, or being a religious minority, or any number of factors. When you're pushed aside like that, or it's not even necessarily intentional, your life kind of has a strange, almost, well, what I said, an uncanniness to it, a kind of seeing things from a different way than what you would be expected to see it. And honestly can feel very sci-fi at times. It's like the life you're living is very different than the life everyone else is living. And, you know, I've experienced this feeling of, it's even sort of when you're watching a television show and into the sort of the very basic, oh, where am I kind of thing, and you sort of feel like ghostly or invisible, and that's a kind of supernatural, uncanny experience. You know, it's quite a normal experience for, you know, people across different groups to feel that way, but when you sort of recontextualize it, it's like you've become, society has made you into a ghost. So I think that's what I mean, that there's a way that when you're living in the margins, that you're living a life that has these kind of speculative elements to it, even though you might not normally think of it that way.
I love that description. That's absolutely fantastic. And I cannot wait to read. I've read a small sample, but I can't wait to read the full Sorrowland in all of its glory. So a huge, huge thank you, Rivers, for joining us this evening.
Absolutely, and thank you.
And one thing I didn't like to say actually is, not in front of Rivers because I didn't want to embarrass them, but they have been compared to Marlon James, Colson Whitehead and Jeff Vandermeer. So no pressure there at all. So onto, there was sprinklings of Gothic within that, and so onto another Gothic sounding gem, which is actually taken from UK history. And this is Cunning Women by Elizabeth Lee, which is out in April 2020 from Windmill. It's set in the shadows of the Pendle Hill trials, and here is Elizabeth to introduce it.
Hello everybody, I'm Elizabeth Lee, and thank you for letting me tell you about my debut novel, Cunning Women. It is set in 17th century Lancashire and is about Sara, who, like her mother, bears a devil's bite, a stain on the skin that marks her out as a witch. And it is Sara's greatest wish that her little sister, Annie, who is as yet unmarked, be spared this fate. When Sara meets Daniel, the local farmer's son, these two tentatively build a connection, and it seems that a better future might be possible. However, when a zealous new magistrate arrives in the village and when a terrible, brutal act takes place, everything Sara holds dear is threatened. The inspiration for the book actually came from a documentary that I watched about the Pendle Witch trials. But what fascinated me about it was what began the whole thing, which was that the eldest daughter in the family met a peddler and asked to beg or buy some pins from him. He refused, and she became so angry that she cursed him. And he was so terrified of this young girl that he had what we now know was probably a stroke. She was overcome with remorse, confessed to the magistrate, and that began the whole terrible set of events that I'm sure you are all familiar with. But I could not stop thinking about that young girl and what it must have been to, on the one hand, have so much power that an older man was so afraid of her and her words, and on the other hand, to have had so little power because she was ostracised, scorned, desperately poverty-stricken, and all of those hopes and dreams that should be available to a young girl, I think she was only 17, were almost certainly not available to her. And I couldn't stop thinking about how it would feel to live that life. And from that came the character of Sara, and from Sara the story flowed, and I very much hope that you enjoy reading it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me talk about it, and I really hope that by April, when the book is out, I will actually be able to see some of you in person, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you.
I am very much looking forward to that. I've heard there is a sprinkling of witchcraft and forbidden love, which stop it, no don't, because that just sounds absolutely up my street. Right, time for some poetry now, and a little bit of a change in the proceedings. And this is from the other joint inaugural winner of the New Writers' Prize, and it's Monika Radojevic's Teeth in the Back of My Neck, which is all around identity and different culture fusions and all these kind of things. And here she is to read a poem for us.
Hi, my name is Monika Radojevic. I am the inaugural co-winner of the Murky Books New Writers' Prize. My debut poetry collection is called Teeth in the Back of My Neck. I'll be reading a poem today that really reflects on the main themes of the work, which is to do with identity and marginalization. This poem is called Jane. When you let your mouth gape and fumble your way around my name, or you misspell it for the second time, third time, fourth, in an email when I have already spelt it out for you. I picture you looking me directly in the eye as you take an eraser and slowly rub away each of my eyelashes, finally my lips, so I must stay mute to my own erasure. And then you wonder why I fold inwards and hug myself away from you. I realize that this might be an overreaction. I don't care. My name walks into the room before I do. It's my badge of dishonor, my invisible birthmark, my raised red flag that I might walk like you, talk like you, even smell like you, but something about me is differently constructed. And you like to reshape people and their origins to what suits you best, don't you? I know. You like to let yourself pretend it sits easy on your shoulders. We're good at keeping it mutual, pretending to be okay with things. I see it in the way you ask me to accommodate your inability to relax your J's, roll your R's, harden your C's, as you bulldoze your way through a conversation and evidence your discomfort. Seems surprising to you, right? That I might take something so momentary and feel it like hot water. What's a name, after all, but a rubber stamp on the soul? It might seem small to you, but when I was a child, Dad used to laugh at how I nestled Jane into my middle name. I figured I would rebrand to fit a different mold, a monosyllabic beauty at no one's inconvenience. Maybe then my teacher of 7 years would spell my name correctly on my school reports. And Jane was a heroine in her own right, wasn't she? Swinging from Tarzan's arms to her own vines. I guess I thought I could imitate that airy freedom feeling those other girls seemed to pull directly from the air. So Jane was my casual camouflage, picked to let everyone know I too had an unshakable right to sit in my seat. And I too could dress up like Disney to smooth over my mispronunciations in the classroom. You know, the ones that made everyone's laughter take on sharp edges. But Jane and I kept it nonchalant, wrote down all the wrong words to memorize later and proudly correct Mum in front of others. I hugged Jane close when I signed my clumsy childhood documents, pushing my real name to the edges for a while, and pretended to be confused at my parents' amusement. Thank you very much.
What a great poem. I think that's going to be an absolutely incredible collection, which will be out from Murky Books in May. And I think, like I said, a searing debut that can be used for the cover quote if anybody wants to. So just a reminder that you can be tweeting this event and sharing your thoughts at, here it comes again, #Cornerstones 2021. Almost like magic. We are over halfway, believe it or not, so I hope you're enjoying your box of treats. Have to be careful how you say that actually in public, so let's all move swiftly on, and we're actually moving far afield into the 1980s and off to Malibu. I mean, that's the dream, and that is for Taylor Jenkins Reid's Malibu Rising, which will be out in May from Hutchinson, and here she is to tell us about it.
Hi, I am Taylor Jenkins Reid, author of Daisy Jones and the Six, and I am so incredibly excited to be able to share my new book, Malibu Rising, with you. Somewhat similar to Daisy Jones, Malibu Rising does let you in on a peek of the maybe more wild and dramatic moments in the lives of famous people. But this time, it's surfers and models at a beach party in 1980s Malibu. The surfers and models I'm talking about are specifically 4 siblings, Nina, Jay, Hud, and Kit, who grew up in Malibu and also grew up in the shadow of their famous father, Mick Riva, who abandoned them when they were children. Now adults, the book follows all 4 of them throughout a fateful day in August of 1983 when Nina is hosting her infamous annual Riva party. Over the course of that day and night, long-held tensions in this family will come to the surface. Lately, I find that in order to write a book, I have to really fall in love with a time and place. I have to become obsessed with it. For my book, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, that was 60s Hollywood. For Daisy Jones and the Six, that was 70s rock. And now, for this book, it's Malibu. I have lived in Los Angeles for 15 years now, and I am still not over the beauty of Malibu. It's obviously the ocean, but it's also the mountains, the coastline, the way that the Pacific Coast Highway follows the coast the way that it does, and also, to be honest, the celebrity mansions. I am completely enamored with the rustic beauty of Malibu. And I'm also a little bit obsessed with the fact that just because something looks like paradise doesn't mean that it's heaven. That is a theme that I keep coming back to in my work over and over again. The vast difference between what something looks like on the outside versus what it feels like to live it. In this particular case, being the child of a famous singer is perhaps not all that it's cracked up to be. Over the course of writing this book, the Rivas, Nina, Jay, Hud, Kit, and their mother June, who you learn about in a past storyline, have become my favorite characters. I love this story with all my heart, and I am hoping that you do too.
And a huge thanks to Taylor for filming that for us. Oh, the word Malibu, it brings back heady nights of my 20s and certain drink, but also the trauma of not being allowed a Malibu Barbie when I was in my youth. Let's all move on. It's not about me, it's about the book. So on to our next author, Felice Fallon, who, and this is not a cop-out, but I cannot describe interviews with an ape properly. So I really, really want, it's so incredible, the idea behind it. So Felice, welcome. I was wondering if you could tell us all about the book, which is out in July from Century. You're on mute, Felice, sorry.
You're absolutely dead right. I was.
The summer, the saying of the summer.
You know what it's like with us seniors and technology. Forget it. Anyway, we'll try that again. Karla's interview, it was interesting for me to hear her speak because the first thing she said was, I have no idea how to describe my book. And here you were saying, I have no idea how to describe her book. So that makes 3 of us.
In a really positive way, though, because the book is so interesting on so many levels. But over to you to kind of blurb it for us.
I think I'll start this time. We chatted briefly last week, but I think I'll start this time with my inspiration for the book, how I came to write this, which I told you about previously, and that is having developed an interest in animal cognizance, the study of animal cognizance and animal emotions. And this is an area of science that has just exploded and taken off and caught the imagination of so many people. And indeed, I was one of those people. And I began to, it made me think, if we could talk to animals, what would they say? What would they tell us about themselves? And what would they tell us about us? Because in the end, that's what we're really interested in, is us. And there happens to be a TED Talk I saw recently on YouTube about this very question of animals being able to communicate, and several people, a musician, Peter Gabriel, as I mentioned, and Vincent Cerf, one of the creators of the internet, are developing something now which they refer to as the interspecies, interspecies internet, with a view to doing just this, to communicating to quote unquote these alien intelligences. And the other thing is what was coming across a video on YouTube about a signing gorilla called Coco. She's deceased now, very sadly, but she could sign. She learned to sign between 400 and 1,000 words. And then there's the story of Alex, the parrot, who became very famous because of his cognitive skills and so on. And we know about crows and things. So that was the inspiration for the book. What would we learn? What would they tell us? And my protagonist, a signing gorilla, does exactly that. He's called Einstein. And we meet him in the jungle, where he is captured by poachers, his family slaughtered, and he's subsequently sold to a fairground, I believe it is, and from the fairground to a circus, and he eventually ends up in a zoo in a city which very quickly after his arrival, 6 months or so after he arrives, is torn apart by a violent insurgent civil war. So he goes from one form of incarceration to a catastrophic state. And we follow his thoughts about all these various captivities that he's subjected to, about the people that he interacts with, and so on and so forth, until his stint at the zoo, where he meets the chief vet of the zoo, and who eventually becomes his best friend and his collaborator. And the result of this collaboration is, in fact, this book, Interviews with an Ape. And he and his and the vet team up, and together they interview several animals and the humans that interact with them. And we hear each of their stories as first person, if you will, exposés of their life, their experiences, what they feel about their experiences, and what they feel about the people that they interact with. And in that sense, it is absolutely about us as the other animals that inhabit this amazing place called Earth. How do we fit in? How do the animals look at us and go, what are you guys doing? You know, what? You know, this kind of just the whole, our place here, and why we do what we do, and what it means to all the other life forms around us, and what it means to us. So I guess that's the bit. I mean, unless you have something you want that I haven't covered.
I love the term an expose. That's instantly got me even more intrigued, because, you know, who doesn't love one of those? But how did you go about kind of getting into the mindset of the different animals, I guess, and reflecting humanity and us as animals?
Well, that's the great joy of writing fiction, because you can imagine anything that you like. And for me, that finding the voices of the various animals was an enormous challenge, first of all, but also a great deal of fun. It was like being a kid again, and almost playing dress up. You know, you could be kind of any character that you wanted to be, but at the same time, even a child has an instinct that it has to be real, that there's something about it that has to draw the audience in, if you will, draw your playmates in. You know, it can be as fantastic as you can imagine, but it also, there has to be a rapport. So, you know, just playing pretend, really. Yeah.
Final question for me. How did you pick the animals which you wanted to have the conversations with, or which you wanted Einstein to have the conversations with?
That's a really good question, actually, because I've thought since a lot about that. You know, I've done a lot of research about this particular subject because I find it so interesting. And about every day something new comes out about. There was a film recently on television about My Teacher, the Octopus, you know, the intelligence of the, you know, octopus have a brain in all of their 8 arms. I mean, how crazy is that? and about beluga whales who will look in a mirror and do almost make faces and do various kind of play, you know, and watch themselves, and it's so it was hard. So I guess I tried to take very iconic animals, a gorilla, an elephant, a factory farmed pig, a dog, a foxhound, a retired foxhound who finds himself in a medical laboratory. Who else? A bile bear, a moon bear in Southeast Asia who's milked for his bile. So yeah, I mean, just examples of animals that who have particularly, I suppose, who are particularly endangered at this point, or have particularly violent experiences. I'm not trying to preach, though, I must emphasize this in the book. It's not about convincing people to become vegans or anything like that. It's just about, you know, we are just part of life out there. We're just one part of it. Let's look what the other parts are up to. Let's see how we fit in with these other parts and how we might communicate and have a better relationship, I guess. But yeah, this whole idea of alien, I mean, this whole thing about the interspecies internet is not just about communicating eventually with other animals on our planet, but, you know, who else is out there? Is there anything or anyone else out there that we might eventually use this technology to communicate with?
Well, maybe that will be book 2, Felice. Maybe.
Oh, well.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you so much. On that note, though, I have to say, I'm not sure I want to know what my cats think about me, because all I get is disdain from them. So now on to something else completely different, which feels like it could be the sort of hashtag of this, but the actual hashtag is, it's back. Hashtag Cornerstone 2021. So, as I said, onto something completely different now, and this is a debut for fans of Alicia Malik, who I absolutely adore, Candice Carty-Williams, who I also think is brilliant, and this is Sara Jafari's debut, Mismatch, which is all about finding your place when you're caught between cultures. Here she is to tell us about it.
Hi, my name is Sara Jafari and I'm the author of the novel The Mismatch. The Mismatch is a coming-of-age novel that follows the lives of two women, Soraya in modern-day London and her mother Neda in 1970s Tehran. It's a story all about belonging, difficult families, first love, and feeling mismatched within yourself. It's the perfect next novel for fans of Queenie and The Flat Share. The story starts with Soraya having graduated from university and realising she has no idea what she wants to do with her life. Among this two, at 21 years old, she's still never been kissed. And so she figures if she can get her first kiss out of the way, perhaps everything else in her life will fall into place. And that's when she sets her sights on Magnus Evans, a rugby lad from her university, who she thinks she has nothing in common with, and so he'd be the perfect person for her to have her first kiss with, and never speak to again. Of course, it's never quite that simple. Throughout the course of the novel, they will realise they have a lot more in common than they first thought, and their love story really is all-consuming, difficult, but ultimately romantic, and one that I hope you'll fall in love with too. In the backdrop of this too, we get glimpses into her mother Neda's life in 1970s Tehran during the Islamic Revolution, and her kind of making the decision to be a practicing Muslim for herself. Also, we kind of see her move to England with her husband and how it kind of affects their relationship. And whilst this is a novel, I would really say that is a love story. I would also say it's also a book that really at its heart is about families and belonging. The reason I wrote this book was because I often didn't see my own experiences reflected in the books I was reading. I don't think there are enough British Iranian writers being published at the minute, and so I often wrote my personal experiences in articles for publications such as Galden, and I'd write about experiences such as feelings about virginity in British Muslim kind of cultures, also kind of feeling like you have to have a double life and kind of how that is essentially, and also dealing with having a relative who has substance misuse issues and kind of the anxieties that come from that. And since writing articles such as this, I got so many messages from people relating to these experiences, and particularly saying that they don't see them written enough, and actually how refreshing it is to see it written down. So really, I wrote this book for those people and for myself, within kind of a fun love story as well, just so we can see ourselves in the books we're reading, and feel seen. And I really hope you enjoy reading The Mismatch.
A book that looks at where cultures divide and blend and all things, that's like savage catnip, so I can't wait for that one. And yeah, that will be out in June 2020 from Arrow. So again, on to something completely different. In fact, actually, you should have used your box of treats as a drinking game for the amount of times that I've said that, and we'll carry on saying it. And this is actually our penultimate author. I can't quite believe we've got to that point in the evening already. And this is Emma Hughes, who's written a novel, No Such Thing as Perfect. It's out from Century in June. And it's a book about social media and love, which I always find really interesting because I've bagged a husband on Twitter. So I always like to see how other people have gone about it. Fictional or not fictional, just nosy. And it's about the complexity of love when you are matched with someone who, based on your online history. Here is Emma to tell us more.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Hughes. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for all being here this evening. It's all really exciting. I'm here to tell you a little bit about my novel, No Such Thing as Perfect, which is all about love and technology. It is the story of a 29-year-old editorial assistant at a newspaper called Laura Morrison, whose life on all fronts, work, family and relationships, has not been going very well for a while. And she is offered the chance to be the first person to trial a new dating service from a tech startup called Cupid, which uses your online footprint, like your browser history, what you've been buying on eBay, what you've been streaming, the videos you watch on YouTube, and uses that to build what they claim is the most accurate profile of you possible. And they claim that all of that data holds the key to who you really are and what is really going to make you happy in a relationship. And they ask Laura to trial it and write a feature about them. And Laura is being threatened with being made redundant, so she thinks she has nothing to lose, and she says yes. And she is matched with a man called Adam, who on paper does seem to be her perfect match. He's handsome, he's kind, he really cares about climate change, he works in green energy, and he even manages to win over her very judgmental older sister, who Laura is living with after her flatmates left her in the lurch, and the rest of her quite difficult family. So everything to start with is going really well, but then Laura meets the man who wrote the algorithm that put her and Adam together in the first place, who's an American data scientist called Cass, and those kind of familiar doubts about how reliable her instincts really are when it comes to love start to rear their heads again. So yeah, that's it. It's about the kind of mysteries of attraction and the kind of things that draw us to people, and also make us push people away. It's about relationships, not just romantic ones, but within families, and how those family relationships can end up defining you, well into your 20s, your 30s, and beyond. It's about technology, and how technology is only as good as the people who build it, even though we all rely on it to do things for us. right now without a second thought. We put so much trust in these things, yeah, I really hope that you enjoy it. Thank you so much. Bye.
I'm secretly hoping that Emma also finds the whole mystery of the algorithm and solves it all for us, because I still don't blinking understand it, and I would like to, but that sounds brilliant. Algorithms and love. I can't even say the word, let alone understand what they are. Anyway, just to mention again that if you would like a proof, there will be a link in the chat so that you can request them, be they physical or digital, which I'm now starting to call physical, when you can combine the two. So we're at our final, last but not least author, and I am delighted to be joined by Nancy Tucker, whose The First Day of Spring will be out from Hutchinson, and it's the lead debut. I know this because it says it in huge letters on the press release. So Nancy, lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Simon.
Now, before we talk about your book, I have one question, because I've discovered that you've recently done a degree in experimental psychology. What is that?
I wish it was as exciting as it sounds. It's just a psychology degree. It's a run-of-the-mill psychology degree. I think my university felt like they wanted to be a bit special, a bit like me being a bit special, being the lead debut, and they just had to call it something different, but it's your average psychology degree. We didn't do any very interesting experiments. We just learned a lot about like rats navigating mazes, that kind of thing.
Wow. So tell us about your book, which is not about rats navigating mazes.
Has nothing to do with rats. So my book is The First Day of Spring, and it's told from the perspective of Chrissy. Chrissy is an 8-year-old child living in the north of England with her mother, her kind of part-time father, and a rather mischievous battalion of friends. And within the first few pages of the book, Chrissy recounts how earlier that day she has murdered a younger child by putting her hands on his neck and squeezing. And this has made her feel alive and powerful in a way she's never felt before. We then jump forward 15 years and we kind of re-meet Chrissy, except now she's living as Julia, which is the new identity she's been given, having served her time for the crime she committed. And the book is it's a back and forth between the child storyline, where we learn a bit more about the circumstances that preceded this awful crime, and the adult storyline, where Julia is trying to understand a world that she hasn't been part of because she's been living in the forensic system. And she's come out as this kind of reborn, fully formed adult and expected to completely construct a life afresh. And she's figuring out her hopes, her dreams, her fears, her main fear being that she won't be allowed to retain custody of her own daughter, who is 5 years old, who is called Molly.
So what drew you to this story in particular? And because it's a difficult subject matter.
It's definitely difficult. I think there were two main things that drew me to it. I think first, I expect most of us have a kind of peripheral awareness of cases that have shocked the nation because they are cases of children hurting other children. And I think they stick with us because they force us to question everything we believe and everything we want to believe about innocence and responsibility and forgiveness. And I thought they were such interesting concepts that I really wanted to explore them in a book. The other thing I'm really intrigued by is the idea of new identity and having to start afresh. In my day-to-day life, I work in mental health services, and this is something that I find comes up a lot with my patients, because when mental illness has been very dominant and it's taken up a large proportion of someone's life, it can feel like when they're contemplating recovery, they need to be a new person. There's not a life pre-constructed, they have to build it for themselves. So I suppose I felt like that was quite a nice way of combining my writing and my day job.
And how has that been in terms of your day job? Have you seen, obviously you can't talk about personal experiences, but did you feel it's something that, people's misconceptions or people not being allowed second chances or things that you do when you don't understand yourself, those all seem to be things that come from the book?
Oh, definitely. And I think I always say that working in mental health services is a big privilege. It's a tough job, but I do feel it's an honor to do this job because it forces you to be curious about people and the things they do and the reasons they do them. And it forces you to be non-judgmental. And those have been very helpful things when writing the book, because obviously, it's shocking. The things I'm writing about are shocking, but I've kind of tried to approach it, I hope, with an attitude that is one of curiosity rather than condemnation.
Yes, and also I think fiction's a really safe space for people in which to explore all these kind of things. I wanted to mention actually, because you have written non-fiction before, how has the experience been different?
So I've written 2 non-fiction books. I wrote a memoir about my experience of an eating disorder, and then I wrote a second kind of more general non-fiction book about mental illness in young women. I love writing non-fiction, I love writing fiction. I would say the reasons I love writing both of them are 2 sides of the same coin, because in non-fiction you don't have to make anything up, everything's already there, and that's quite a relief because you don't have to do any plotting and you don't have to figure out kind of story arcs, and that's quite nice. But then in fiction, nothing's there and you can make everything up, and that's quite joyful and quite electrifying, particularly when you've come from non-fiction.
And on that joyful note, I shall let you go, Nancy, but thank you so much for joining us. Wait to read the book, very excited. So that's it. What a fab night. And I should say, by the way, that Nancy's book has been compared to Room by Emma Donoghue, which is quite the thing. So yeah, but it's been a fantastic night. As you can see, there is so much to look forward in 2021. I think we all are pinning all of our hopes on 2021 and now all of these books, so no pressure whatsoever. Don't forget, you can ask for proofs in the chat, but also, as you will see on the screen shortly, you will be able to get a link which will be coming with the catalogue by email, along with video again, so you can relive the joy of the last hour. And any queries that you've got, email Georgia Gwilliams2 at penguinrandomhouse.co.uk. I just want to thank the authors, live and pre-recorded, who have joined us. What an amazing 10 books we've got to look forward to. Some hope in the year that has basically been a bin fire. So thank you to all of the authors. Thank you to everyone from Cornerstones, and we will speak to you again soon. Bye.